Mountain Man said, "Porch or my bed." The choice she made changed the ranch forever. The mountain road stretched endlessly ahead, winding like a scar through jagged cliffs and dying trees. Abigail Harper sat silently in the back of the wagon, her hands clenched tightly around the only thing she had left, her Bible. The leather was worn. The pages were soft from years of tears and whispered prayers. It was more than a book. It was her last thread of hope. The driver hadn't spoken much since they left town, just one warning before the mountains swallowed them whole. "You sure about this? Folks don't last long up there." Not with him. She didn't ask what he meant. Deep down, she already knew. By the time the sun began to sink behind the peaks, painting the sky in streaks of gold and fire, they arrived. And the ranch came into view slowly, like a truth no one wanted to face. Broken fences leaned like tired bones. The barn door hung crooked, groaning with every push of the wind. The land itself looked weary, like it had given up. Abigail's chest tightened. "This is it," the driver muttered. He didn't offer to help her down, didn't wish her luck. Just flicked the reins and left her standing in a cloud of dust, as if even staying a moment longer was too much. Silence followed. Heavy. Unwelcoming. The kind of silence that made you feel watched. Abigail swallowed hard and adjusted the small bag on her shoulder. Her boots touched the dirt slowly, uncertainly, as if the ground itself might reject her. "Lord," she whispered under her breath, her fingers tightening around her Bible. This is where you've brought me?" The wind picked up suddenly, whipping her skirt and carrying a low, haunting howl across the valley. Then, a door slammed. Her breath caught. He stepped out from the shadows of the house like a man carved from the mountain itself. Tall, broad, still. Caleb Boone. His beard was rough, his clothes worn from hard labor, and his eyes were cold. Not angry, not curious, just empty. Like whatever had once lived inside him had long since been buried. He didn't smile, didn't greet her, didn't even ask her name. His gaze swept over her once, slow, assessing, unimpressed. "You're the mail-order bride." Not a question. A statement. Abigail opened her mouth, but no words came out at first. Her throat tightened under the weight of his presence. "Yes," she finally managed, her voice soft but steady. Silence stretched between them. The wind howled again, louder this time. Caleb spat to the side and stepped closer, his boots heavy against the dirt. "You got two choices," he said bluntly. No warmth, no hesitation. He jerked his head toward the house, then toward the porch. "Porch, or my bed." The words hit her like a physical blow. For a moment, everything inside her went still. This wasn't what she had imagined, not even close. She had prepared herself for hardship, for struggle, for sacrifice. But not this, not this kind of demand. Her grip tightened around her Bible, her knuckles turning white. 1,000 thoughts rushed through her mind at once. Fear, anger, confusion, the sting of humiliation. But beneath it all, something deeper stirred. Conviction. She remembered the nights she had prayed for escape, for direction, for God to make a way where there was none. And this, as harsh as it felt, was the door that had opened. She lifted her eyes to Caleb, and for the first time, he saw something in her that made him pause. Not defiance, not weakness, faith. "I'll take the porch." Her voice was quiet, but unshaken. The wind seemed to still for a brief moment, as if the mountain itself was listening. Caleb frowned slightly, caught off guard. Most wouldn't hesitate. Most wouldn't choose discomfort. Most wouldn't choose dignity when survival was on the line. But she had. He let out a short, humorless scoff and shook his head. "Suit yourself." Turning away, he muttered, "Won't last a week." The door slammed behind him, leaving her alone once again, and Abigail stood there for a long moment, her heart pounding in her chest. The sun had almost disappeared now, shadows stretching long across the broken land. Slowly, she walked toward the porch. Each step felt heavier than the last. Not because of the distance, but because of what it meant. This was not just a place to sleep. It was a line, a decision, a declaration. When she reached the porch, she set her small bag down and sat carefully on the worn wooden boards. They were cold, rough, unforgiving. Nothing like the comfort she had left behind. Nothing like the future she once dreamed of. For a moment, doubt crept in. What if she had made the wrong choice? What if this place destroyed her instead of saving her? Her eyes filled with tears, but she refused to let them fall. Instead, she opened her Bible with trembling hands, flipping to a page she had read countless times before. Her voice broke as she whispered into the growing darkness, "The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want." The words felt fragile in the vast silence, but she kept going. "He makes me lie down in green pastures." She looked out over the dry, lifeless land and almost let out a bitter laugh. Green pastures? Here? Yet something inside her refused to give up. "He restores my soul." A tear finally slipped down her cheek. "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil." Her voice steadied, because suddenly she understood. This was the valley, this broken ranch, this hardened man, this impossible situation. And yet, she was not alone. "I will fear no evil, for you are with me." The wind softened just slightly, as if in response. Abigail closed her eyes, clutching the Bible to her chest. "Lord," she whispered, her voice trembling but resolute, "I don't understand this place, and I don't understand him, but I trust you. If you brought me here, then you have a purpose, even if it costs me everything." Inside the house, unseen by her, Caleb stood by the window, watching. He told himself it didn't matter, that she was just another mistake, another burden, another person who would leave when things got hard. But as he watched her sitting on that cold porch, praying instead of running, something unfamiliar stirred in his chest, something he hadn't felt in years. He turned away quickly, pushing it down. "She won't last," he muttered again, but this time it sounded less certain. Outside, the last light of day faded. Darkness settled over the mountain, and on that cold, unforgiving porch, faith took its first stand. Night came quickly in the mountains. One moment, the sky burned with fading gold. The next, darkness swallowed everything whole. The temperature dropped without mercy. Abigail pulled her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders as she sat curled on the porch, her back pressed against the rough wooden wall. The boards beneath her still held a trace of the day's warmth, but it was fading fast. Too fast. The wind crept in first, slipping through the cracks, curling around her ankles, climbing her spine like icy fingers. She shivered violently, pulling her knees to her chest, trying to preserve what little warmth she had left. Inside the house, a faint glow flickered through the window. Firelight, heat, safety. She could almost feel it just by looking. Then came the sound. Footsteps. Heavy, slow. Caleb. He moved across the cabin floor, each step deliberate, each movement echoing in the stillness of the night. Abigail held her breath. For a brief moment, Temptation whispered, "You don't have to do this. Just go inside. No one would blame you." Her eyes shifted toward the door. So close. All she had to do was stand up, knock, and surrender. Comfort was one choice away. But at what cost? Her grip tightened around her Bible. Her heart pounded, not just from the cold, but from the battle raging inside her. This wasn't just about a place to sleep. It was about who she would become. Tears filled her eyes as memories flooded back. The home she had lost, and the betrayal that forced her onto this path. The nights she had cried out to God, asking for rescue, for direction, for anything. And now she was here, on a stranger's porch, fighting not just the cold, but herself. "Lord," she whispered, her voice trembling, "I didn't come this far to lose myself." The wind howled louder, as if challenging her resolve. Then, a distant cry echoed through the mountains, low, haunting. Wolves. Her breath caught in her throat. The sound sent a chill deeper than the cold ever could. She wrapped her arms tighter around herself, her eyes scanning the darkness beyond the porch. There was nothing out there, and that was the worst part. The unseen, the unknown. Fear pressed in from every side. Her thoughts spiraled. What if they come closer? What if something happens? What if you don't make it through the night? Her breathing quickened. Panic began to rise. For a moment, just a moment, she almost broke. She shifted slightly, her body instinctively turning toward the door. Ready to give in. But then, her hand brushed against the edge of her Bible, and everything paused. Slowly, deliberately, she pulled it into her lap. Her fingers shook as she opened it, the pages fluttering in the wind before settling. She couldn't see clearly in the dark, but she didn't need to. She knew the words by heart. Her voice came out weak at first, barely more than a whisper. "The Lord is my light and my salvation." The wind roared again, trying to swallow her voice, but she kept going. "Whom shall I fear?" Her voice grew stronger. "The Lord is the strength of my life." Her teeth chattered, her body trembling uncontrollably. "Of whom shall I be afraid?" Silence answered her, but it wasn't empty. Something had shifted. Not outside, but inside. The fear didn't vanish completely. The cold didn't disappear. The wolves didn't go silent. But her spirit? Her spirit stood up. She straightened slightly, her back no longer pressed in defeat, but lifted in quiet resistance. "You hear me, don't you?" she whispered, her eyes closing. "I know you do." Tears slipped down her cheeks, cold against her skin. "I don't need comfort, if I have you." Inside the cabin, Caleb paused mid-step. He had heard her. At first, he tried to ignore it, tried to drown it out with the crackling of the fire, with the scraping of his chair, with anything that could silence that soft, persistent voice drifting in from the porch. But he couldn't. Her words cut through the walls like they weren't even there. Scripture, prayer, faith. Things he had buried long ago. He clenched his jaw, frustration rising in his chest. "Foolish woman," he muttered under his breath. But something about it didn't sit right. He moved toward the window despite himself, his boots heavy against the floor. Carefully he pulled the curtain aside just enough to see. There she was, curled up on the porch, shivering, alone. And yet, she wasn't panicking, she wasn't begging, she wasn't running. She was praying, still, calm, steady in a way that made no sense. Caleb frowned, something tightening in his chest. He had seen strong people before, people who could endure pain. But this was different. This wasn't stubbornness. It wasn't pride. And it was something deeper, Something he didn't understand anymore. Something he had once known. Before everything was taken from him. He let the curtain fall and turned away sharply. "This won't last," he said again, louder this time, as if trying to convince himself. But his voice echoed in the empty cabin, and it sounded hollow. Outside, the night stretched on. The cold grew sharper. Each passing hour felt heavier than the last. Abigail's body ached. Her fingers were numb. Her lips trembled with every breath. Sleep came in fragments, restless, shallow, broken by the cold and the distant sounds of the wilderness. More than once she startled awake, her heart racing, disoriented and afraid. Each time, the same choice stood before her. Go inside or stay. Give in or hold on. And each time, she chose to stay. So not because it was easy, not because she wasn't afraid, but because something inside her refused to let go of what she believed. Just before dawn, when the darkness was at its deepest and the cold at its cruelest, Abigail's strength began to fade. Her body slumped slightly, exhaustion overtaking her. Her breathing slowed. Her grip on the Bible loosened. "Lord," she whispered weakly, barely conscious, "if I fall, hold me." A single tear slipped down her temple as her eyes closed. And in that moment, peace. Not the absence of hardship, not the removal of pain, but something deeper. A quiet, unexplainable peace that wrapped around her like warmth from another world. The wind softened, the night stilled, and for the first time since she arrived, Abigail slept. Morning came gently. Soft light spilled over the mountains, chasing away the darkness. The door creaked open. Caleb stepped out, expecting to find the porch empty. He had seen it before. People didn't stay. They left. They always left. But this time, he stopped. Abigail was still there, curled on the porch, alive, breathing, unbroken. Frost clung to the edges of her hair, her shawl dusted with the evidence of a brutal night. But she hadn't moved. Caleb stared at her, something unreadable crossing his face. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, finally, "You're still here." His voice was quieter this time, less certain. Abigail stirred slightly, her eyes fluttering open as she slowly sat up, wincing from the stiffness in her body. She looked at him, not with anger, not with accusation, but with calm resolve. "I told you," she said softly. "I'm not going anywhere." Caleb studied her face, searching for cracks, for weakness, for regret. But he found none, only something steady, something unshaken. He shook his head, almost in disbelief. "You're stubborn." Abigail gave a faint, tired smile. "No," she said gently. "I'm faithful." The word landed differently this time. Not just a statement. A truth. And Caleb felt it. Deep. Unsettling. Real. He turned away quickly, hiding the flicker of something in his eyes. But as he walked back inside, one thought refused to leave him. What kind of faith survives a night like that? Outside, the sun rose higher. And though the land still looked broken, something had begun. Unseen. Unspoken. But undeniable. The war had started. Not against the mountain. Not against the cold. But within the heart. And faith had won the first battle. The ranch didn't change overnight. At least, not in ways the eye could immediately see. The fences were still broken, the fields still dry, the cattle still thin and slow. But something unseen had begun to move, and Abigail felt it. The authority she didn't know. She carried on her third morning. Abigail rose before the sun, not because she had to, but because something within her stirred her awake. A quiet pull, a whisper. She stepped off the porch slowly, her body still sore from the nights in the cold, and walked into the open land. The sky was dim, painted in soft gray and fading stars. She stood there, barefoot in the dirt, listening, not to the wind, but deeper than that. "Lord," she whispered, placing her hand over her heart, "Mo, you didn't just bring me here to survive, did you?" Silence, but not empty silence. The kind that feels like heaven is waiting. Her eyes moved across the land, the struggling crops, the restless cattle, the weight that seemed to sit over everything like a shadow. And suddenly, she understood. This wasn't just a broken ranch. It was a place burdened by loss, fear, and hopelessness. And where hopelessness lived, nothing thrived. Her breath caught slightly. "Then you didn't send me here just to live here," she said slowly. "You sent me here to change something." The realization settled deep in her spirit. Not pride, not control, authority, not her own, but given. She took a slow step forward into the field, then another, and another, until she stood in the center of land that everyone else had already given up on. Her voice trembled at first, but only for a moment. "In the name of the Lord," she said softly, yet firmly, "I speak life over this land." The words hung in the air. The wind didn't stop. The ground didn't shake. Nothing dramatic happened. But something shifted. Deep, invisible, real. The first subtle miracle. Later that day, Abigail noticed something small. So small, most would have missed it. One of the calves, the weakest in the herd, had been lying near the fence for 2 days. Barely moving, barely breathing. Caleb had already written it off. "Won't make it," he had said flatly. But Abigail walked toward it anyway, slowly, gently. The calf didn't resist, didn't react. It just lay there, fading. She knelt beside it, her dress brushing the dirt, and placed her hand carefully on its side. It was cold, too cold, and her heart ached. "Lord," she whispered, tears filling her eyes, "you care about everything you created, even this." She hesitated for a moment, then closed her eyes. "I don't have power," she said softly, "but you do." Her hand remained steady. Let life return. No thunder, no flash, just stillness. After a moment, she exhaled and slowly pulled her hand away. Nothing seemed different. The calf remained still. Abigail lowered her head slightly, her faith quiet but unwavering. "Even if I don't see it yet, I trust you." She stood and walked away. That evening, Caleb froze mid-step. "What the—" The calf was standing, weak, unsteady, but standing. He stared in disbelief as it took a slow step forward. Then another. It didn't make sense. It shouldn't have been possible. His eyes shifted slowly toward the porch, where Abigail sat quietly, reading her Bible like nothing had happened. He didn't say anything, but something inside him tightened. Faith in the small things. Abigail didn't announce what she was doing, didn't try to prove anything. She simply lived it. Every morning she walked the land, praying softly under her breath. Every task became intentional. When she cooked, she prayed over the food. When she cleaned, she hummed hymns. When she touched the animals, she spoke gently, not just to them, but over them. Strength, peace, life. Not loud, not dramatic, but constant, and slowly. Things began to respond. Visible change begins. Within days, small changes started appearing. The soil, once hard and resistant, became softer beneath her feet. Seeds that had refused to sprout began to push through the surface. Green, faint, but undeniable. One morning, Abigail knelt beside the field, her breath catching in her chest as she saw it. Life. She smiled, tears filling her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. From a distance, Caleb watched. He had worked this land for years, fought for it, cursed it, nearly broken himself trying to force something out of it. And yet, it had responded more in a few days than it had in seasons. His jaw tightened. It didn't make sense, but he couldn't deny it. The atmosphere shifts. It wasn't just the land. It was the feeling. The heaviness that once hung over the ranch began to lift. The silence felt different, less suffocating. The animals were calmer, less restless. Even the wind seemed softer. One evening, Caleb sat outside, staring across the property. Something felt off, or maybe right. He couldn't tell. Abigail stepped out onto the porch, wrapping her shawl around her shoulders. She didn't speak right away, just stood beside him, looking out at the same land. "You feel it too, don't you?" she said quietly. Caleb didn't look at her, but after a long pause, "Yeah." That was all he said, but it was enough. The authority becomes clear. The next morning, Abigail stood at the edge of the ranch, where the land met the wild mountain terrain. This was where things felt darkest, heaviest, like whatever had settled over the ranch was strongest there. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. "I don't belong to fear," she said firmly. "Sir, and this land doesn't belong to death." Her voice carried just enough to cut through the silence. "This place belongs to God." A gust of wind rushed past her, stronger than before, but she didn't step back, didn't flinch. "I claim peace here." Silence followed. But it wasn't empty. It was settled, like something had been pushed back. Caleb begins to notice. Later that day, Caleb approached her, his expression unreadable. "What are you doing?" he asked bluntly. Abigail looked up from where she was tending to a small patch of new growth. "Taking care of the land." "That's not what I mean," he said, stepping closer. His eyes searched hers. "You're doing something, and I don't understand it." She held his gaze, not defensive, not afraid. Faith doesn't always make sense before it becomes visible. Caleb frowned. "That calf should have died." "I know. The crops shouldn't be growing." "I know." He took a step closer, his voice lower now. "So what are you saying?" Abigail stood slowly, brushing the dirt from her hands. "I'm saying God hasn't forgotten this place." The words landed heavier than anything else she had said. Caleb looked away, his jaw tightening again. Because deep down, that was the one thing he had believed for years, that God had forgotten. That night, as Abigail sat on the porch once more, the cold didn't feel as sharp. The darkness didn't feel as heavy. And for the first time, the ranch didn't feel like a place of survival. It felt like a place of becoming. She looked out over the land, her heart steady. "Little by little," she whispered. And in the distance, a breeze moved gently across the fields, brushing over the first signs of green. Faith had been planted, and now it was growing. The air changed before the storm ever arrived. It was subtle at first, too subtle for most to notice. But Abigail felt it the moment she stepped outside that morning. The wind carried a strange weight, not just cold, but heavy, oppressive, like something unseen was pressing down on the land again. She paused on the porch, her eyes scanning the horizon. The mountains stood still, too still. Even the animals sensed it. The cattle were restless, shifting uneasily, their low murmurs breaking the quiet. Birds that usually circled the sky had vanished. Everything felt held, waiting. Abigail's grip tightened around her shawl. "Something's coming," she whispered. The gathering darkness, By midday, the sky had begun to change. Dark clouds rolled in from behind the mountains, thick, low, and unnatural in their speed. They swallowed the sunlight piece by piece until the land was cast in a dull, gray shadow. Caleb stood near the fence line, watching the sky with a hardened expression. "This ain't right," he muttered. He had seen storms before, plenty of them, but this felt different. He turned sharply toward the ranch. "Get inside," he shouted. Workers, few as they were, moved quickly, securing what they could. The wind picked up fast, snapping loose boards and rattling the barn doors like a warning. But Abigail didn't move. She stood in the open field, staring at the approaching storm. Not frozen, not afraid. Listening. "Abigail!" Caleb's voice cut through the rising wind. "Now!" She turned slowly toward him, her expression calm but serious. This isn't just a storm," she said. Thunder cracked across the sky, loud enough to shake the ground beneath their feet. Caleb scowled. "Storm's a storm, and it's about to tear this place apart." But Abigail shook her head. "No, this is resistance." The word hit differently. Caleb didn't respond, but something about it unsettled him. The storm breaks loose. The first drop of rain hit like a warning, then another. Then the sky opened. Rain poured down in sheets so thick it blurred everything in sight. The wind roared violently, ripping through the ranch like it meant to erase it from existence. Fences snapped. Loose wood tore free and slammed against the ground. The barn doors flew open with a deafening bang. And the cattle panicked. They scattered, pushing against the broken fences, to some breaking through entirely and disappearing into the chaos beyond. "No!" Caleb shouted, already running. "This is it! We're losing everything!" Years of struggle, of barely holding on. All of it, about to be washed away in a single storm. He fought against the wind, trying to regain control, but it was useless. The storm was too strong, too wild, too overwhelming. Fear versus faith. Caleb stumbled back toward the center of the ranch, rain soaking him through, his breathing heavy, his eyes filled with frustration, and something deeper. Fear, real fear. He turned and saw Abigail standing in the storm. Not running, not hiding. Standing. The rain drenched her completely, her hair clinging to her face, her dress whipping violently in the wind. But her feet were planted, steady. "Abigail!" he yelled, his voice nearly swallowed by the storm. "We have to get inside." She didn't move. Instead, she stepped toward him. One step, then another, until she stood right in front of him, close enough that he could see her eyes clearly through the rain. There was no panic in them, only conviction. "We don't run from this," she said. Caleb stared at her like she had lost her mind. "Don't run?" he snapped. "This storm is tearing everything apart." "Yes," she said firmly, "and if we respond in fear, we'll lose more than the ranch." Lightning split the sky, illuminating them both for a brief, blinding second. Caleb's jaw clenched. "Then what do we do?" he demanded. Abigail didn't hesitate. "We stand." The call to pray. She reached for his hand. Caleb flinched slightly, not from her touch, but from what it meant, and he hadn't prayed in years. Not since the day everything was taken from him, not since the silence that followed. "I don't do that anymore," he said roughly. Abigail's grip tightened, not forceful, but firm. "Then start now." Another crack of thunder shook the ground beneath them. The storm surged harder, as if reacting to the moment itself. Caleb's eyes darted around, the broken fences, the scattered herd, the destruction already unfolding. Everything in him screamed to act, to fix, to control. But nothing he did was working. Nothing he had ever done had been enough. His breathing slowed, just slightly, and for the first time in years, he let go. Not of the ranch, but of the illusion that he could save it alone. Slowly, reluctantly, Caleb dropped to his knees in the mud. The rain pounded against his back, and his hands trembled. "I don't know what to say," he admitted, his voice barely audible. Abigail knelt beside him without hesitation. "You don't have to say it perfectly," she said gently. "Just say it honestly." The prayer that shifted the atmosphere. Abigail lifted her face toward the storm, her voice rising, not in fear, but in authority. "Father God," the words cut through the chaos. "We know you are greater than the wind, greater than the rain, greater than every force that comes against us." The storm raged on, but something in the air began to shift. "We will not fear what we see," she continued, her voice steady and bold, "because we trust in who you are." Caleb swallowed hard beside her, his hands clenched tightly. Abigail turned slightly toward him. "Say something," she urged softly. His throat tightened, and the words felt foreign, heavy, like something buried too deep to reach. But then he remembered, not clearly, not fully, but enough. The sound of laughter once filling this land, the warmth of a life he had lost, the prayers he used to pray before everything fell apart. His voice broke as he finally spoke. "God." The word felt strange, but real. "I don't understand why you let it all go, but I can't do this anymore." The wind roared again, but his voice didn't stop. "If you're still there, if you still care." He squeezed his eyes shut, tears mixing with the rain. "Help me." Silence followed, not outside, but inside him. A breaking, a release. The storm responds. Abigail lifted her hands slightly, her voice rising one final time. "Peace over this land." For a moment, nothing happened. The storm still raged, and the wind still howled, the rain still poured. But then, slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the wind shifted, not gone, but weaker. The rain softened just slightly. The violent edge of the storm began to dull. Caleb's eyes opened, his breath catching. "What?" He looked around, confusion written across his face. The storm wasn't gone, but it wasn't the same. It had lost something. Its force, its dominance. The miracle revealed. By morning, the storm had passed. The sky cleared slowly, revealing soft light breaking through the clouds. Caleb stepped outside, bracing himself for devastation. But what he saw didn't make sense. Yes, there was damage, broken fences, scattered debris, but not nearly what it should have been. Not after a storm like that. And the herd? He turned sharply, scanning the land. Gone. His heart dropped. "We lost them," he whispered. But then, a sound, faint at first, then louder, hoofbeats. Caleb turned toward the ridge, and there they were, the cattle, returning, on their own, one by one, calm, uninjured, as if guided back. Caleb stood frozen, his mind struggling to understand what his eyes were seeing. That's not possible. But it was happening, right in front of him. Abigail stepped beside him quietly, her eyes soft, but knowing. "God doesn't just protect," she said gently. "He restores." Caleb didn't respond. He couldn't. Not yet. But something inside him had shifted. Not fully, not completely, but enough. As he watched the herd return and the light spread across the land, one truth settled deep in his spirit. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was something else, and something bigger, something real. And for the first time in years, Caleb Boone didn't feel alone. The storm had passed, but something else had been stirred. Not in the sky, not in the land, but in Caleb, the silence. After the miracle, that evening, the ranch was quieter than it had been in years. Not the heavy, suffocating silence that once hung over everything, but a different kind. Still, gentle, almost sacred. The cattle had returned. The damage was repairable, and for the first time in a long while, nothing felt like it was slipping through his hands. Caleb sat alone outside the cabin, a lantern flickering beside him, its soft glow barely cutting through the fading light. His elbows rested on his knees, his hands clasped together, his head slightly bowed. Not in prayer, not yet. Just thinking, or maybe remembering, because now that the noise of survival had quieted, the past had room to speak again. The pain he buried. He hadn't talked about it in years, not to anyone, not even to himself. But tonight, it rose, uninvited, unstoppable. "I had a wife once," he said suddenly, his voice low and rough. Abigail, who had stepped quietly onto the porch behind him, paused. She hadn't meant to interrupt, but she didn't leave either. Instead, she sat gently on the edge of the porch, giving him space, but staying close enough to listen. Caleb let out a slow breath, his eyes fixed on the darkening horizon. "She laughed a lot," he continued. A faint, broken smile flickered across his lips. "Couldn't go a day without finding something to smile about, even when things were bad." His voice softened, almost distant. "So, name was Hannah." The name lingered in the air, sacred, untouched. Abigail didn't speak. She knew this moment wasn't meant to be interrupted, only held. The winter that took everything. "It was winter," Caleb went on, his jaw tightening slightly. "Worst one I'd ever seen." The wind picked up gently, as if echoing the memory. Snow came early, stayed too long, crops failed, supplies ran low. His hands clenched tighter. "I thought I could handle it." That old pride crept into his voice, but it quickly broke under the weight of what followed. "I thought if I worked harder, pushed longer, I could fix it." His breathing grew uneven. "But I couldn't." The words came out sharper this time. Raw. Honest. "She got sick first," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Fever, coughing, too weak to even stand." Abigail's heart tightened as she listened. Caleb swallowed hard, his eyes glistening now. "I prayed," he admitted. The confession hung heavy in the air. "I prayed every night." His voice cracked. "Begged God to heal her, to do something, anything." A tear slipped down his cheek, but he didn't wipe it away. "I told him I'd do whatever he asked. Just don't take her." Silence, painful, unrelenting. "But he did," Caleb whispered. "The loss that broke him." The words didn't stop there. They were both gone by spring. Abigail's breath caught. "Both?" she asked softly. Caleb nodded slowly, his face tightening as if the memory itself was too heavy to hold. "She was carrying our child," he said. The weight of that truth settled like a stone. "I lost them both." The wind stilled, and the night seemed to pause. "I buried them myself," he continued, his voice hollow now. "Right up there." He gestured toward a small rise beyond the ranch. "No preacher, no prayer, just dirt and silence." His hands trembled slightly. "And when I called out to God after that," he laughed bitterly, "I got nothing." The pain in his voice was undeniable. No answer, no comfort, no miracle. He shook his head slowly. "So I stopped. Stopped praying, stopped believing, stopped hoping. Because what kind of God listens And does nothing, he finished, his voice breaking completely. Abigail's gentle truth. Silence followed, deep, heavy, but not empty. Abigail stood slowly and walked toward him, her steps careful, intentional. She didn't rush, didn't try to fix him. She simply came close and sat beside him. For a moment, she said nothing. Then, softly, "He didn't do nothing." Caleb let out a sharp breath, shaking his head. "It felt like nothing." "I know," she said gently. And something about those words, "I know," made him pause. Not defensive, not angry, just listening. Her own darkness. "I lost everything too," Abigail continued quietly. "Not the same way, but it broke me just the same." Her eyes drifted downward, her voice steady but filled with quiet emotion. "I trusted people I shouldn't have. Gave my heart where it wasn't protected." A flicker of pain crossed her face. "And when everything fell apart, I thought God had abandoned me." Caleb looked at her now, really looked. Not as a stranger, but as someone who understood pain. "So, what changed?" he asked, his voice softer now. Abigail placed a hand over her heart. "I met him, in the middle of it." Caleb frowned slightly. "He didn't take the pain away," she continued. "He met me in it." Her eyes lifted to his, "And he never left." The moment of confrontation. Caleb shook his head again, but weaker this time. "I prayed, and they still died." "Yes," Abigail said gently, "and that pain is real." She didn't dismiss it, didn't argue it. She honored it. "But God's presence isn't proven by what we keep," she said softly. "It's revealed by what carries us when everything is gone." The words hit deep. Too deep. Caleb's breathing faltered, because something inside him, something buried, recognized the truth in it. The breaking point. "I was angry," Caleb admitted suddenly, his voice trembling. "I hated him." The confession came out raw, unfiltered. "I blamed him for everything." His hands clenched into fists again. "For taking them. For leaving me here. For letting this place rot." His voice rose, emotions spilling over. "I carried it all alone." His chest heaved, years of pain, unspoken, untouched, rising all at once. "And it's killing me," he said, his voice breaking completely. Silence. Then Abigail reached for his hand. This time, he didn't pull away. The surrender. "You don't have to carry it anymore," she said softly. Caleb shook his head weakly. "I don't even know how to let it go." Abigail's grip tightened slightly. "You don't let it go all at once," she said. "You give it, piece by piece." Tears streamed down Caleb's face now, unrestrained, his strength, his control, gone. Just a man, broken, hurting, honest. "Then help me," he whispered, "and the prayer that heals." Abigail nodded gently. Together they bowed their heads. Not in perfection, not in ritual, but in surrender. "God," Caleb began, his voice shaking, "I don't understand you." "Honest, I don't understand why I lost them. Painful. But I can't carry this anymore. Real." He swallowed hard, his voice barely holding together. "If you're still here." A pause. Then, "I need you." Tears fell freely now, not hidden, not resisted, given. Abigail's voice followed, soft but filled with quiet authority. "Father, you see every wound, every tear, every unanswered question." The air felt different again. Still. Close. "Meet him here," she whispered. "Not in explanation, but in presence." The healing begins. Nothing dramatic happened. No thunder, no voice from heaven. But something shifted, and deep within Caleb's chest. The tightness loosened. The weight lifted slightly. Not gone, but lighter. His breathing steadied, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel empty. He felt held. Caleb wiped his face slowly, his hands still trembling. "I don't feel fixed," he admitted quietly. Abigail smiled gently. "Healing is a process, not a moment." He nodded slowly, absorbing that. Then, after a pause, "Thank you," he said. Two simple words, but they carried everything. Abigail stood, stepping back toward the porch. But Caleb remained where he was, looking up at the night sky. Different now. Not distant, not silent, but open. And for the first time since that winter, Caleb Boone whispered into the darkness, not in anger, not in accusation, but in hope. "Stay." And this time, he believed God would. Restoration didn't arrive with noise. It came quietly, steadily, like rain soaking deep into dry ground, unseen at first, but impossible to stop once it began. The slow turning of everything. In the days after Caleb's surrender, something changed in him, not all at once, but noticeably. He rose earlier, worked with purpose, not desperation, spoke less harshly, listened more, and sometimes he prayed, not long, not eloquent, just simple words whispered under his breath while mending a fence or tending the herd. "Thank you. Help me. Stay." It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and Abigail saw it, not with pride, but with quiet gratitude, because she knew this was how transformation began. Working together. The ranch no longer felt like a burden carried alone. It felt like something shared. Caleb and Abigail worked side by side, repairing broken fences, clearing fields, tending to animals that now responded with surprising calm. There were moments of silence between them, but they were no longer heavy. They were peaceful. One morning, as they worked near the barn, Caleb paused and glanced toward the fields. "They're growing faster than they should," he said, almost to himself. Abigail followed his gaze. The once barren land now stretched, with visible rows of green, stronger, fuller, unmistakably alive. She smiled softly. "Life responds when it's invited," she said. Caleb shook his head slightly, still amazed. "I fought this land for years." His voice trailed off. "And now it's giving." He didn't finish the thought. But he didn't need to. They both knew why. Overflow in the land weeks past. And the change became undeniable. The crops didn't just grow, they flourished. Thicker than expected. Stronger than the soil should have allowed. The cattle multiplied at a pace Caleb had never seen before. Healthy calves. Stronger mothers. Even the weakest of the herd now moved with renewed life. Supplies that once ran low lasted longer. Food stretched further. Nothing was wasted. Nothing lacked. It wasn't just provision. It was overflow. The first visitor's word spread slowly at first. Neighbors who had once written Caleb off began to notice something unusual. "How's he still running that place?" "I heard the storm hit him hardest." "That land should have died years ago." Curiosity turned into visits. One by one they came. At first, just passing by, then stopping, then staying longer. One afternoon, an older rancher named Thomas rode up, his weathered face lined with disbelief as he surveyed the land. "This can't be the same place," he muttered. Caleb stepped forward, wiping his hands on his shirt. "It is." Thomas shook his head, pointing toward the fields. "That soil wouldn't grow anything last season." Caleb glanced at Abigail, who stood quietly nearby. Then he said something he never would have said before. God had other plans. The words felt unfamiliar, but right. Thomas looked between them, unsure what to make of it. But he couldn't deny what he saw. From mockery to honor. Not long ago, Caleb Boone had been a cautionary tale. A man who lost everything. A ranch that was beyond saving. People had whispered about him, avoided him, given up on him. But now, those same voices changed. He turned it around. There's something different about that place. I don't know what he's doing, but it's working. Mockery turned into curiosity. Curiosity into respect. And respect into honor. But Caleb didn't carry it the same way he once would have, because now he knew. This wasn't his doing. The porch becomes sacred ground. The porch where Abigail once slept through freezing nights became something else entirely. People began to gather there, not formally, not planned, just drawn. A struggling farmer came first, then a woman burdened with grief, then a young man unsure of his path. They didn't come for answers. They came because something about that place felt different, peaceful, safe, alive. And Abigail welcomed them all. She didn't preach loudly, didn't force anything. She simply listened, prayed, spoke gently, and somehow that was enough. Caleb watched it all from a distance at first, then closer, then beside her. One evening, as the sun dipped low, he leaned against the porch railing and looked out at the small group gathered. "They're not here for the land," he said quietly. Abigail smiled. "No," she said. "They're here for what God is doing in it." The public acknowledgement. One day, a larger group arrived, neighbors, workers, even those who had once openly doubted him. They stood at the edge of the property, looking out over the thriving fields and healthy herd. "This doesn't just happen," one man said. "No," Caleb replied. "It doesn't." There was a pause. Then Thomas, the older rancher, stepped forward again. "I was wrong about you," he admitted. The words carried weight. It's not just for Caleb, but for everyone listening. "I thought this place was finished," Thomas continued, "but whatever's happening here—" He shook his head slightly. "It's real." Caleb took a slow breath. All eyes were on him now. The old version of himself might have taken credit, might have used this moment to prove something, but that man was gone. Instead, he stepped aside slightly and gestured toward Abigail. "She didn't just change this ranch," he said. "She reminded me who God is." The words landed deeply, and for a moment, no one spoke, because they could feel it. This wasn't just success. This was restoration. The shift in Caleb. That night, Caleb stood alone in the field, looking out over everything that had been restored. The land, the animals, the people. But most of all, himself. Abigail approached quietly, stopping beside him. "You've come a long way," she said softly. Caleb let out a quiet breath. "I didn't do this." "I know," she replied. He turned to look at her. "And I couldn't have gotten here without you." Abigail shook her head gently. "You chose to believe again," she said. "That's what changed everything." The wind moved gently across the land, brushing through the tall grass and thriving crops. The same land that once carried death, now carried life, abundance, peace. Caleb looked out over it all, his voice low but steady. "I used to think this place was cursed." Abigail smiled softly. "And now," he paused, then said, "Now I know it was waiting." The sun dipped below the mountains, casting golden light across the ranch. And for the first time, everything felt complete. Not perfect, but whole. And what had once been a place of loss had become a place of overflow. The mountain had changed, not just in how it looked, but in how it felt. Where there had once been silence, there was now laughter. Where there had once been struggle, there was now peace. Where there had once been death, there was now life. And at the center of it all stood a porch. The porch that became holy ground. It was early evening. The sky stretched wide in soft shades of gold and amber, the sun slowly dipping behind the mountain peaks. Abigail stood alone on the porch, her fingers lightly tracing the worn wood of the railing. This place, this exact spot, had once been her hardest test. Cold nights, lonely prayers, moments where giving up would have been easier than holding on. And yet, this was also where God had met her, not in comfort, but in surrender. She closed her eyes briefly, whispering, "You were here the whole time." The wind moved gently around her, no longer harsh or biting, but soft, almost like a quiet response. Caleb's decision. Behind her, the cabin door creaked open. Caleb stepped out slowly. He paused for a moment, watching her. Not the way he had when she first arrived. With distance, with doubt. But now, with understanding, with gratitude, with something deeper. Love. He took a few steps forward, stopping just beside her. "You still come out here every evening," he said quietly. Abigail smiled faintly, her eyes still on the horizon. "It reminds me." "Of what?" She turned slightly toward him. "Of where it all started." Caleb nodded slowly, on his gaze drifting over the land. "You chose this place," he said. "You could have had warmth, safety, an easier path." Abigail met his eyes gently. "I didn't choose the porch," she said. "I chose obedience." The words settled between them, deep, unshakable. Caleb exhaled slowly, his heart full in a way he didn't yet have words for. "That choice," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "changed everything. The weight of what she did." He turned fully toward her now. "You didn't just survive here," he continued. "You brought life back to a place that had already given up." His voice softened. "You brought me back." Abigail's eyes filled with quiet emotion, but she didn't look away. "You let God reach you," she said gently. "That's what matters." Caleb shook his head slightly. "No," he said. You stayed, when it would have been easier to leave." His voice lowered. "You believed, when I couldn't." A pause. Then, more quietly, "You loved, when I had nothing left to give." The truth of it hung in the air. Heavy. Sacred. The love confession. Caleb took a step closer. Closer than he had ever stood before. His voice, when he spoke again, carried no hesitation. "I don't want this life without you in it." Abigail's breath caught slightly, not from surprise, but from the weight of what he was saying. "I don't just mean here, on this ranch," he continued. "I mean anywhere." He reached for her hand slowly. This time, it wasn't uncertain. It was intentional. Steady. "I've spent years losing everything that mattered to me," he said. His eyes held hers fully now. "I won't lose this." A moment passed. Then, "Stay," he said softly. But this time, it meant more. Not as someone passing through. Not as a guest. Not as a stranger. His voice deepened with conviction. "Stay as my wife." The choice, again. Silence followed. But it wasn't empty. It was full of everything they had walked through, the pain, the healing, the transformation. Abigail looked down at their joined hands, then back at him, and in that moment, she remembered that first night, the cold, the fear, the choice. Porch or my bed. Back then, she had chosen dignity, faith, obedience. Now, she was being asked to choose again. But this time, not from survival, from fullness. Her eyes softened, her voice steady. I didn't come here looking for love, she said quietly. I came here following God. Caleb nodded, his grip on her hand tightening slightly. I know. A small, tender smile touched her lips, but somewhere along the way, she looked at him fully now. I found both. Tears filled Caleb's eyes, not from pain this time, but from something deeper. Relief, gratitude, joy. Abigail took a small step closer. Yes, she said. The covenant moment. The wind moved softly around them as if the mountain itself was bearing witness. No grand ceremony, no crowd, just two people, changed by grace, standing in truth. Caleb lifted her hand gently, his voice low but certain. I promise. I won't be the man I was. Not perfect, but surrendered. I'll lead with faith, not fear. I'll honor what God has done here. His voice softened. And what He's given me in you. Abigail's eyes shone as she listened. I promise, she replied. You're to stand with you, not just in the good, but in the hard places too. Her voice deepened with quiet strength. I'll remind you when you forget. And believe when it's difficult. They stood there for a moment, hands joined, hearts aligned, not just in love, but in purpose. The legacy begins. In the days that followed, the ranch became more than just a place of restoration. It became a place of refuge. People didn't just come for help anymore, they came for hope. Families were restored. Broken hearts found healing. Faith was reignited in those who had long since given up. And the porch, that simple weathered porch, became a symbol, not of hardship, but of transformation, of what can happen when one person chooses faith over comfort. Final reflection. One evening, long after the sun had set and the stars filled the sky, Caleb and Abigail sat side by side on that same porch. No words were needed, just presence, peace. After a while, Caleb spoke softly. You ever think about what would have happened if you chose differently that first night? Abigail smiled gently. I do. He turned toward her. What do you think would have changed? She looked out over the land, now full of life, movement, and quiet beauty. Then she said, everything. Final message. Sometimes, the smallest choices carry the greatest weight. A moment of obedience, a step of faith, a decision to stand when it would be easier to give in. You may not see the impact right away, but heaven does. And in time, what feels like a sacrifice becomes a story of transformation. Closing prayer. Father God, and thank you for the places you bring us, even when we don't understand them. Thank you for the moments that test us and the strength you give us to stand. Teach us to choose faith over comfort, obedience over fear, and trust over doubt. Restore what has been broken in our lives, just as you restored that ranch. Let our lives become a testimony of your goodness, so that others may find hope through what you've done in us. And remind us that one faithful choice can change everything. In Jesus' name, amen.